Okay. Well, we're really lucky today to be joined by Becky Holmes. Becky is a preeminent and I would say world-renowned expert in romance fraud. And then again, there's a degree of irony here, Becky, because our most recent guest, who is also based in the UK, was an individual by the name of Neil Malarkey. One of the things Neil is famous for is a particular scene in an Austin Powers movie where Neil talks about um, Swedish made penis enlarger pumps. And there's several jokes made on this. Now, it is quite ironic and certainly unusual that we are transitioning from Swedish made penis enlarger pumps to a world renowned expert in romance fraud. But again, we are really lucky that you're taking some time today to join us. We very much appreciate it.
I'm going to disassociate myself from all Swedish-made penis pumps.
Well, I'll tell you, after that interview, Becky, I got an email from somebody in Sweden. And what he had told me was, he goes, the reason why it's Swedish made is because of the Swedes' prowess in engineering. That is why that was linked to Sweden, is because there are many really good engineers in Sweden. So that was the nature of the joke. Apparently, that's what the Swedes were telling me. So
I mean, it's like sexual IKEA.
So who is Becky Holmes? Well, Becky is the creator and the voice behind the very popular Twitter account called Death to Spinach. Becky's Twitter account in just over a few years has gotten about 115,000 followers on Twitter, which is almost like a city of followers when you think about it. That is an incredible amount of followers. And why is everybody following Becky? It's because she is a preeminent world-renowned expert in this very serious issue of romance fraud. And she recently wrote a book called Keanu Reeves is Not in Love with You, which focuses on this serious issue of romance fraud. And I would highly encourage everybody out there to take a read of the book, because Becky does a terrific job balancing a very serious topic, and a topic that everybody should be educated on and you should be made aware of, balancing that with a ton of humor. The book is hilarious. The book has all of this back and forth with potential fraudsters. And Becky, your back and forth with them, again, is classic. And we're going to get into that. But it is awesome. But where I've got to start is your LinkedIn profile, Becky. I think this is a tremendous story of finding your passion in life. Because if I look at your profile prior to 2015, it would be a pretty normal, went to university, found a few jobs in what you studied. You worked in PR at a number of different companies. And then in 2015, things changed. And in 2015, the profile reads something along the lines of entrepreneur, author, creator of a huge Twitter following in Death to Spinach, and again focusing on romance fraud, and you're a sought after public speaker and again world renowned expert in romance fraud, and it is a complete change in your profile, which again I think is awesome, because you talk about in this book about finding your passion in life, which again I think is, if everybody could do what you do, it would be amazing. And again, it's a great story out there for everybody. But maybe just give us some perspective on the transition from PR expert to romance fraud, and sought after public speaker, social media queen, all of that. How did that transition happen?
So the dates on LinkedIn are a little odd. What happened was, as you say, went to university. I studied actually contemporary art and media, which was sort of completely random. Then I did go into a number of PR jobs, and I think I was in PR for 15, 16 years, something like that. And then I was having such a good time in my career. I was climbing the corporate ladder, doing really well, loving it. I had a great team working for me. I loved the company I was with. I loved my boss. And then I got ill with ME, and I had to leave my job. And it was a big shock, because I'd sort of bundled into my self-worth what I was doing for a living. So I decided that I wasn't going to have kids. I was going to be a career woman. And my husband I'd met through my job as well. When I got poorly, obviously I had to give up my job. My marriage fell apart. I moved back to my hometown with my mum.
Oh my God.
It was everything kind of came crashing down around me. And it was like that for some time. And then when COVID hit, it was really odd. That's when all of this started. So I set up my Twitter account in August 2020. And that's when, weirdly, life began for me. Well, began again, because I found something that I could do to entertain myself during COVID. I was making other people laugh, which is always a nice feeling anyway. And I kind of inadvertently became a bit of an agony aunt for people who'd been the victim of romance fraud. So this kind of passion was awoken in me, and it was things that I was able to do while I was resting. I was able to do the things while I was ill, because I could do things, a couple of things an hour or nothing for 2 days and then do something for a couple of hours. So it's almost been by accident, but the happiest accident.
That's and why romance fraud? Was it always something that kind of bothered you? Why the attachment to romance fraud? And like what was the link? What was the particular link to it? Did you have a family member who was who got scammed out of money or anything like that? Why the link to romance fraud?
Before I started my Twitter account, I knew nothing about romance fraud. That's how random how randomly it all started. So I had been in a relationship with somebody who was very good at spending the little money that I had, and eventually worked his way through my savings account. Now, when I started talking to people about romance fraud, it's then that I thought, oh, actually, hang on, maybe I was a victim. I'm not quite sure.
Yep.
But the subject came about because the people who were messaging me on Twitter, the people who I have this back and forth with, and I like to waste their time, they are all romance fraudsters. And when I was putting these things up on Twitter, people were messaging me saying, I've been the victim of a romance fraud. So I started finding out more about the subject and how misunderstood it is, and how different the actual victims of romance fraud are to what you might think they are. So it became incredibly interesting to me. And, because I had time on my hands, I sort of went off on a bit of a mission to find out more about it. And I was talking to more and more victims about it, and it was remarkable how smart and articulate and fun these people were that I was speaking to, and not really what I was expecting. So it was as much a learning curve for me as anything else, but it really became a passion of mine. And now I just sort of live and breathe romance fraud. My friends think that I'm probably the most boring person in the world because I keep going to fraud webinars and things, but it's a fascinating subject.
It is. The other question I want to ask you is, you've chosen to go at this with humor, and heavy on the humor, because the book is hilarious. Like the way that the back and forth that you have with, with the people who are trying to take advantage of you and scam you. But the way you go at them is with humor. And again, it is hilarious watching this back and forth where they think you're being serious and you are just going at them with, again, these crazy, and not just words, but pictures as well. Like the pictures you've got in your book are amazing. Like, again, it is the creativity in order to drive them and to come up with this stuff is quite high. Why the choice to go after them with humor, as opposed to just saying, you know what, I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to call the police, which we'll talk about that a little bit later as well, but the effectiveness of that. Why the choice of humor? Why was that the way to go at it?
I think it came about through how I first started amusing myself during lockdown. So the reason why I was doing this is nothing to do with romance fraud. It was nothing to do with raising awareness, because at the time I knew nothing. It was just to amuse myself.
I see.
So I was making myself laugh. And then it turned out to be making other people laugh as well. But I've always, in my whole life, no matter what I've been through some, some terrible times and, real lows with mental health. I am such a believer in laughter is the best medicine. I am a real person for finding humour in most things. Even very bleak things can have a humorous side. Not everything, obviously, but there is something to be found in most. Some of the best comedy out there has got a real tragic side to it as well. And the problem with fraud, and I've found this when I've spoken to people, or I've been to conferences or whatever, there's a lot of the time somebody will stand up on stage and they say, right, I'm going to talk about fraud now. And everyone thinks, oh God, and they start looking at their phones and looking out the window and whispering to each other. And because it can be so boring, and it's full of initialisms, anachronisms and jargon. And people just think, I have no interest in listening to this whatsoever. And when you get now the terms and conditions, I mean, nobody reads those. It's so boring. You just press tick, don't you? And on to the next thing. I wanted this to be something that people engage with, but kind of accidentally learn something at the same time. And I think humour is a brilliant way to do that. It's a brilliant way to give people a message without being patronising, without being boring. And reaching far more people than you would ordinarily. If I'd set up a Twitter account with the intention of educating about romance fraud, I'd probably have 20 followers, and I'd know them all. So this was it's just turned out to be very effective in a way that I didn't see coming.
I agree with you. I could not agree with you more. I think that is one of the reasons why you stay with your book from page 1 until the very end, is because the humor is there to keep you entertained, and you're at the same time you're learning about a really, really important topic that needs to get out there. I could not, and you found that balance between the two. So maybe let's start with the definition, Becky. What is romance fraud? How would you broadly define romance fraud?
So romance fraud is when a person gets into a romantic relationship with somebody under false pretenses. Now, most of the time, that is for financial gain. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be. I have a friend of mine who was the victim of catfishing, and she was in a relationship, not online, an actual physical relationship with this person for over a year. And it turned out that he was leading several lives.
Wow.
Now, that is, even though there was no financial element to that, she didn't give him money, it's still fraud. It's still a fraudulent relationship. What I deal with in the book is the financial romance fraud, which I think is probably more common.
And why is it so widely used and so successful? I guess you could. There are probably two questions there. Is number one, why is it so widely used? Like again, you would hear the topic and think, well, that can't be that big of a deal. You know what I mean? Like romance fraud. But then when you read the book and you think, wow, it's actually, and you look at the numbers, you share several numbers in your book, which frankly are shocking, like jaw dropping in terms of how widely spread this issue is. Why is it so widely spread? And I guess to link to that, why is it so successful?
I think so. Unlike any other type of fraud, romance fraud is emotional. Now, obviously, other types of fraud have emotion linked to it, but romance fraud is based on your emotion. It's based on this innate human desire we have to love and be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And that will never go, because as soon as that goes, the human race dies. So we will always have that desire. And I think because of that, and it doesn't matter what sexuality you are, or what gender you are, what culture you are, what nationality you are, we all have that as humans. So I think that answers why it's so widespread, because we are all susceptible to that.
Yep.
And not only do we want to be loved, we want to be desired. We want people to find us interesting. We don't want to be lonely. And again, some of these start off as friendships rather than romances, but it's that thing we crave human contact. So I think that's why it's so widespread. It also answers some of why it's so successful. And I think one of the reasons it's so successful these days is because, I mean, look how incredible the internet is. You can talk to anybody across the world. You know, you're over in Canada, I'm here. There's not even a second delay in how we're speaking. It's insanely good.
You're right.
And of course, that's only going to, well, it's going to be more and more effective because of AI coming in, which is a whole new subject. But I think it's so successful because it's so easy.
And what is unique about the romance frauds is the fact that there is very little human connection. And I'm talking one-on-one connection where you actually meet somebody in a coffee shop or something like that. This is, that would seem to be like one of the common themes around most of this, is that there is no one-on-one meeting ever between the person who is getting defrauded out of their money and the person who is perpetrating the fraud. They never actually meet for the most part. Maybe there's some exceptions. And I just love for you to explain the psychology between falling in love with somebody and being subject to a fraud on somebody you've never met before. Because on the face of it, you would think that'd be really hard to do, is to defraud somebody that you never meet. But in all the examples in your book, for the most part, is that's exactly what happened. And the other thing in your book, which is very shocking as well, is that the women who have been subject to this crime are really smart people. These are not, people suffering, let's say, from a mental illness and don't know what they're doing. These are really smart people. In some cases, these are people in law enforcement. And there's just a psychology about it where you've fallen for somebody. And not only have you fallen for somebody, but you've fallen for somebody you've actually never met in person. You know what I mean? Like on the face of it, you'd think, man, that would be really hard. But what you learn reading your book is it's actually not that hard. You know what I mean? It's actually doable. You know what I mean? Because again, the women that are featured in your book are actually really smart people who, again, have just, maybe a moment of weakness or whatever it might be that we all have. And for that second, they just, you fell victim to this crime is basically what it is. So maybe just talk a little bit about the psychology behind that.
So as you rightly say, I focus the book on people who haven't met. I think with one exception, I talk about a detective who actually met her fraudster.
Yep.
And I mean, you have to read the book, but it's a really interesting story. And I do also know quite a few people who have met these fraudsters as well. But because of how I started with Twitter and working on the online stuff, it was easier for me to focus on the online relationships. I think I'm not a psychologist, so I can only kind of really give my own view on it. But these days, everything we do is online. We shop online, we learn online, we work online, we do everything.
You're right.
I met my fiance online while I was researching a book on scammers online, actually. So everything we do is this. We have this kind of instant need for gratification these days. People don't write letters anymore. I remember when I was a little girl writing a letter and great, brilliant. You'd have a pen pal and you'd wait a week and it would get a letter back. But no, everything's in a split second. And it's so common now to meet people online and get to know them online, and not just romantically, but, you and I know each other through online. We're talking that way now. And most people that I've met for work, I've met them online. And I think it's very easy to share things that way. And the other thing that's very easy is when you have a social media profile, anybody can go on and look at what it is, who you are, if you've got pets, if you've got kids, what you like doing. And automatically, if a fraudster decides to put a bit of effort in and to look at what it is that you like, they can make themselves your ideal partner. So, for example, for me, I love dogs. I love scuba diving. I love food. I'm a vegan. All these kind of things. Now, all someone would have to do is spend a little bit of time on, say, my Instagram, and they would learn all of these things.
Yep.
Somebody messages me and says, "Oh, I'm a big dog lover. I've got a rescue dog." I'd be like, "Oh, really?" And then they'd say, I'm really passionate about animal welfare. I'm actually a vegan. Really? So somebody can make themselves what you want. And that's, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. So I think the psychology for me is quite simple. It is that we are used to finding things online. We're used to finding them automatically, and we aren't suspicious of online stuff anymore because it's been around for so long. Now, I spoke to an academic some months ago and I was researching the book, Professor Timothy Levine, and he's come up with this thing called the truth default theory. And I think it is fascinating. And very simply put, it means that human beings, we automatically trust, because without that, the race would have died out. We wouldn't be working. We wouldn't have partners or whatever. And I find that really, really interesting. And initially, when I had this conversation with him, I thought, oh, that's rubbish. I'm really cynical. That's nonsense. But then when I started thinking about it, I thought, so for example, today you said to me, right, I'll be online at so-and-so o'clock. I trusted that. You said, we'll be using this particular platform. I trusted that. My mum rang me earlier and told me something. I trust her on that. Because everything we do, we trust 95% of things that happen. And it's no different when you're talking to people that you might potentially have a relationship with. No matter how cynical you think you are, the fact that you're even talking to somebody means that you have a level of trust with them.
I agree. I think it's extremely well put. I totally agree with you. I agree with everything you just said. I think you're bang on. So who are the typical victims of romance fraud? Who are it's a crime. Let's call it what it is. That's exactly what it is that people are a victim of a crime. Who are the typical victims? Because your book, like you say, it focuses on women. Obviously, that's the focus of your book. But the women are all very different. Maybe you could pick some common. They have some similarities, but they're different. But maybe just give some perspective on who is the traditional or the common victim that someone is going to go after in order to basically get victimized through romance fraud.
So I get asked a lot, who is a typical victim? And it's a really hard one to answer because what I've discovered is that there isn't one. I don't know about over in the US and Canada, but often here, when we have news articles about romance fraud, it's always a middle-aged woman, always looking very sad in the picture, oh, look at me. That's not the case. Obviously, There are middle-aged women that become victim of romance fraud. There are thousands, but it's not always. I've spoken to women in their 20s and I've spoken to women in their 70s. And it's 50-50 men and women as well. I concentrated on women because I only had a certain amount of words and I am a woman. And it's easier to get women to talk about it. But it's 50-50. And you can be gay, straight, black, white, you can be any religion. They don't care about what you are, who you are. They just want your money. So they will pretend to be whatever you want them to be. What I found was that the people who have been victim of romance fraud, there was something that was normally happening in their life at that moment where they kind of took their eye off the ball very, very momentarily. And everybody I know can, appreciate that. Not necessarily with romance fraud, but the other day I nearly gave my credit card details out for a Royal Mail delivery scam because I wasn't concentrating on what I was doing. Now, obviously, romance fraud is a much bigger thing, but I spoke to a lady who her partner was dying, so she had that. Someone else going through divorce, she had that. Somebody else had cancer, she had that. Now, it's not always the case, but it is very common that a fraudster will find you at your lowest ebb, and you might want a little bit of comfort. Now, that's not to say that you are a vulnerable person. You know, I don't think I would describe any of the people I interviewed as a vulnerable person, but you are having a vulnerable moment, which we all have. You know, God, I have 20 a day.
Absolutely.
So the only thing they all have in common is that something was happening where they let their guard down momentarily. And secondly, one thing I always say is that kindness is their similarity. Because what they want to do is help somebody who they believe is their partner. And that's what we all do when we're in a relationship. We all help, you know, somebody with whatever it is that they need doing. And that's what they're doing. It's not because they're stupid. It's because they're kind and they want to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's those two things only.
And do you think do you find that they were educated on the topic, Becky? Like when you sit and say, hey, look, when I sit with them and I tell them what I do, I like that your focus is on romance fraud, you're an expert, you have all this knowledge. When they sit with you, are they like, oh, I never, like, I you know, if I knew you before this whole thing happened, maybe I would, you know, I would have taken a different path. Like, do you think your message getting out there is making a difference, or do you think that, you know, when people are dealing with challenges in their life, which we all do, and it's going to take you to some pretty low spots, that it's really hard to kind of, you know, be focused during that time period? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Some of the women that I spoke to just simply weren't aware of romance fraud.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, before I started my Twitter account, I'd seen maybe 3 stories in the media about romance fraud, and I'd kind of dismissed it because I thought, well, I don't know anybody who's been the victim of it. You know, and most of the time I didn't even finish reading the story that was in the newspaper. I just turned over. So I think there's one of these things where romance fraud isn't a problem until it is.
Yeah.
So some of them didn't know about it. The detective that I spoke to did know about it. Obviously, that's part of her job. But she was recently separated from somebody. And I think there's also, in some situations, there is a feeling that you aren't the sort of person that would, in inverted commas, fall for this. Having read the book, you'll know how much I hate that phrase. And therefore, somebody lets their guard down perhaps a little bit too much as well.
Well, I think, yeah, no, I think it goes back to what you said too, is that, you know, I think if there is a common thread amongst the people who are victims to this, is that they were just being kind, they were just being nice, and I do think that is a common human trait amongst several people, and that they want to give you the benefit of the doubt. They want to be kind, even if they might be aware that romance fraud exists. You might even still block that out and say, you know what, like, you know, I know this person. I don't think that's the case here. I just want to be kind. I want to be nice. I want to help them out. And then you're shocked when they're just not who they say they were.
Well, this is it. And, you know, as I covered in one of the stories, that there are situations where somebody will actually own up, or they'll be found out as being a fraudster, or they'll own up to it. And the person still continues to give them money because they don't want to believe that this is happening.
Yeah.
And I get that.
So let's turn the table now to the other side, the people who are perpetrating these frauds, people who are doing these frauds. What is the profile of a typical scammer? Who are these people that are perpetrating these frauds?
So when I first started writing the book, loads of people said to me, "Oh, it's all Nigeria. It's all coming from Nigeria. It's those people." And I thought, right, I'm going to prove you wrong. However, It turns out that there is a very high portion of romance fraud that does come from West Africa. So Nigeria and Ghana as well. But there's also that the largest portion of romance fraud comes from Southeast Asia. Part of the, these things they call pig butchering scams, which is a very, very technologically advanced cross between romance fraud and cryptocurrency fraud. It's incredibly clever. That they appeal to very, very savvy investors. But yeah, so Southeast Asia, Ghana, Nigeria, and at one point there was Canada.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
On the list. It turned out that in actual fact there were links to West Africa. So I think it was coming from Canada, but with the root of it in West Africa. But it just goes, it's a worldwide issue. It comes from every country.
And how do they find their victims? Like, this is the other thing that you sort of get an appreciation for, is that to some degree, this is an operation. This is a business that these people are running this isn't just one-off stuff. This is, this is like like a business that they're running to scam people. And how do they go about finding the target? You mentioned, obviously there's a lot of information available online. And you can learn a lot about somebody just based on information that's on the internet, which is both, a positive and a negative, just having that much information out there. But how do they find their victims?
So it is online. I mean, dating sites, they obviously have an immediate advantage there, because somebody on a dating site is looking for a relationship. So that's kind of stage one already done for them. And I've seen a documentary where there was a group of lads all working together, and they'd set up profiles, and they would just like every single profile, because ultimately somebody will respond. They'll send a like, they'll get some likes in return. So it's this blanket approach. So dating sites is a huge one. Most of mine have come through Twitter. It's people who just send you a direct message, just hoping to speak to you. It happens all the time on Instagram as well. And the celebrities, they tend to be, the people pretending to be celebrities, I should say, they generally go through Twitter and Instagram because they can claim that it's their account. I don't really do anything with TikTok because I'm too old, but I have heard that it's absolutely rife on there as well. And online gaming.
Really?
Yeah, even sort of ones that, little old ladies like me do. So I like to play online word games, and they're there. It's almost like it would be easier to find. It would be much harder to find somewhere where they're not. And they just speak to as many people as they possibly can, because somebody will respond.
And how are they trying to get you? What's the intro that they're going to try and use in order to get you to engage in at least in a first start conversation? Is there a typical approach? Obviously, they're not going to right off the top say, "Hey, can you send me 10 grand?" They're going to that's going to come later. But what's the typical approach that they're going to try right off the top to try and at least to get your attention and try and engage in a conversation with you?
So again, I think it depends on which platform they're on. The dating site will, of course, be to try and match with you, or to get noticed, so that you introduce yourself on the profile. With the social media platforms, so with Twitter and Instagram, they can range from a very quick introduction that just says "hello, dear." That's a real common one, the word "dear." Hello, dear. Or you can have very, very long, obviously scripted ones about how they've seen your profile picture. They thought that you were somebody that they knew. Have you got a sister called so and so because you look really like somebody they used to go to school with? All these different things that they've obviously learnt over the last few years are a good way to get in. I think ultimately you have to question why somebody that you don't know on something like Instagram or Twitter would send you a message just saying "hello, dear."
Yeah.
I think that's, or saying to you, I hope you don't mind, but I saw how beautiful you are, and I just felt like I had to get in touch. I mean, it's a little bit creepy anyway.
But it works. Like it works, right? Like,
Yeah, it does. And it's one of the reasons, during COVID, romance fraud figures were off the scale.
Yeah.
Because people were at home. They weren't seeing people. That's why I set up a Twitter account, because I was bored and I was on my own. I was lonely. So you can imagine people sitting around, they're furloughed from work. All they're doing is on social media all day. They could very well decide to engage with some people, and lo and behold, they're still speaking 3 months later from their sofa because we're still in lockdown. It was a romance fraudster's dream.
Yeah. So we're online. Let's say we start engaging with somebody who reaches out to us, and it's going well. We're having a decent conversation. What are the warning signs where you'd say, you know what? It looks like it's going well. There's the old saying, if it's too good to be true, maybe it is. But what are some of the warning signs where you'd say, you know what? Something's not right here. Maybe I just need to cut this off. What are some of the things people need to watch out for right off the top to say, look, and I'm talking after they've kind of, they've started to have a conversation with the person. Maybe it's gone on for a couple of weeks or whatever it may be. At what point do the warning signs start to pop up, and that antenna start to go up and say, you know what, I'm starting to get a little concerned here?
So one of the first things that I always think is a real telltale sign is if somebody tries to get you off your platform and onto a messaging service. So the reason they do this is very simple. If you're speaking to somebody on Twitter, for example, if they've defrauded somebody else or someone has suspected them, they can be kicked off Twitter.
I see.
So they want to get you onto either email or WhatsApp or Google Chat, Telegram, one of these things where you can't be kicked off, because once they've got your details, you can't do anything other than engage with them, unless you block them. But so they want to get you off a platform. Now, again, you have to question why. I've been speaking to you for 2 hours. Why would I give you my email? Why would I give you my number? But there's this kind of desperation about it. So that's something to really look to.
And what would be one of the ones that, like WhatsApp or something like that? Like, is that where they're going to try and get you off on?
Yeah, so there's WhatsApp. I often get asked to join Google Chat, which used to be Google Hangouts, and it's like a cross between email and WhatsApp, I guess. So you kind of do it through a messaging service, but it's not monitored, and it's all encrypted. So all you need is an email address, and of course that can be anything. And you can block people on there, but you can't be kicked off.
I see.
Yeah. The other thing I say is to always look out for the profession that somebody tells you that they have, because there are a number that fraudsters, they flock to with good reason. So soldiers, doctors, pilots, oil rig workers, and celebrities, of course. As soon as somebody says that they are a peacekeeping soldier in the Middle East, that's it. Block. Block, delete, report. Peacekeeping soldiers don't have time to be going on Twitter.
Why would they pick a peacekeeping soldier? Like, some of these professions I don't understand. Like how were these? It makes you wonder. Like, how did they even select some of these professions? Like I could understand soldiers. There's actually, there's people in the U.S. One individual in the U.S. who actually tracks down people who pretend they're Navy SEALs. There's a very, very small proportion of the people that actually can get through and being Navy SEALs, but the number of people who are pretending to be Navy SEAls are probably 1,000x the actual number of SEALs. I could understand some form of a soldier, but a peacekeeping soldier in the far reaches of the world, like what's the draw on that, Becky?
Well, because the view would be that they are an honourable man, that they're a peaceful person, that they're moral. Of course, they would be using the photograph of like a really buff soldier as well. So somebody that women would find attractive, that a really handsome, rugged guy. So not only are they honourable and, they want to keep peace and they're very morally upstanding, they're also really hot. So there's all these kind of great things. And going back to how people are able to see your life on social media, the other thing about soldiers is that there are a lot of pictures on Instagram and so on of people in military uniform. So it means that fraudsters have this kind of free library of images that they can steal.
And what about Pilot? That's the other one that kind of there's Pilot. There's one more I want to touch on. See, the thing with Pilot is, in most, like I said, most examples of your book, it would seem like they want to avoid meeting. But I would have thought with a pilot, because you're kind of going all over the place and you have a bunch of back and forth with pilots where they say, oh, I'm flying to so-and-so. Well, you're going to go and meet them there. But I would have thought with pilot, they would have tried to stay away from that profession just because presumably at one point they'd be in your town or your city or wherever, or your country, and you could meet them. Whereas if a soldier, for an example, if they're, stuck away in country X or wherever, it's going to be difficult to get out. But a pilot, you're all over the place. I would have thought pilot kind of puts the scammer at risk a little bit.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I wonder really if that much thought has gone into that one. I suspect it's more that, well, they're all over the place. Women think it's a sexy job. There's lots of pictures of me looking great in a uniform that I can steal from an actual pilot's website. It's probably, we consider it to be a well-paid something as well. And I think there's also a thing where if you pretend to have a job where you work away a lot, there are also a number of things that you can justify. So you can say, oh, I'm away, I've left my bank card at Heathrow, let's say, and I'm now in Jamaica. Or, I've had to fly to Hong Kong, but I've just found out that my daughter is being kicked out of, I don't know, wherever, and she needs money for a hotel. And it's the same with the oil rig workers.
Well, like that's the one that just jumps up. That's the one I don't understand is like how many oil rig workers are there even in the world? If you even got emailed by an oil rig worker, like the probability of that happening has got to be so small, right? Like I don't, like, how many oil rigs is there in the world? Like 100? Like, again, I just and how many of them work? Like, it just seems like just such a crazy choice.
But you see, I get the oil rig worker one. That's one of the ones that I get more than anything.
Okay, so explain. Yeah, what's the allure behind an oil rig worker?
So I think the reason that they do it is because it's a job that none of us know anything about.
I see.
So, I mean, I know nothing about what happens on an oil rig. So if I was talking to somebody and they would say to me, look, I'm not allowed to use my phone because it interrupts with this, that, and the other, I would think, oh, okay. I'm not allowed to video call because whatever. I'm only allowed 3 hours a week, whatever. I would think, oh, God, okay. I have no access to money. All right, okay. There's just a lot of things about that profession that we don't know about. And again, this whole truth default theory, when someone tells you about their job, you don't automatically think, oh, you lying sod. You just go, oh, right, okay. Again, I think there's perhaps that thought that an oil rig worker would be a big burly man that us ladies would like, using tools all day, good with their hands, all that kind of stuff. But also, again, it gives them excellent backstories for when they decide they want money. So they might say to you that they have had an accident and there's an issue with their insurance. So they need money to get to a hospital. Now, all of this is nonsense because I've since found out that you don't even need cash on an oil rig because, I mean, what are you going to spend your money on? You're fed and watered. You've got everything you want. You've got internet access all day, every day. And in fact, people are encouraged to phone and video. But you, if you hadn't looked into it, you wouldn't necessarily know that. So you could say that you've had an accident. You could say that you're ill. You could say that there are some issues with your bank getting through, Wi-Fi problems, whatever it is. a hurried phone call. I need to get some money transferred to so-and-so because my daughter's school is closing for repairs. Oh, I don't know. I'm just going off on one now, but it's a perfect example of something we know nothing about, and somebody can tell us something, and we're more likely to believe that than if they say, I don't know, I work in my local supermarket, because we all know what happens in a supermarket. So I get it. I get the oil rig worker thing. And it also, being on an oil rig, it gives somebody an excellent reason to be on a dating site, because they can say that they're away for quite some time. So they don't really get a chance to go out and socialise and meet people. So there are all these kind of things.
That makes sense.
Think about it, it makes
No,
sense.
you just convinced me. It now makes perfect sense that, but what you're saying too is that, look, if you get approached by a oil rig worker, automatic block, automatic delete, you're out of, like, that is that, or a peacekeeping soldier from some strange country, that is a blazing red flag that this is is not.
It's awful if you are an oil rig worker and you're looking for a girlfriend. This is terrible. But
that's right. If you're an oil rig worker, you're going to say you work 9 to 5 in an office building. That's right. You're an accountant, just like me. That's right, Becky. Oh, that's funny. Now, the other thing you point out is that the scammers as well aren't really good spellers. Is that if they don't necessarily run spell check on their communication? So maybe just comment a little bit about that being a red flag as well. Is that if you see a lot of spelling errors and things like that, that might be a sign that this is not this is not someone you should be talking with.
Yeah, often the people behind these frauds, that they're not native English speakers, so there will be. It's not even necessarily the spelling; it's more the way that we phrase things. Yeah. It's not Western phraseology. So, if I'm introducing myself, I will say, "My name is Becky," or I will say, "I am Becky." But for example, West Coast of Africa, they don't put the I on, so they would say, "Am Becky." So there are small differences in the way that we phrase things, which, when you've seen as many as I have, they become very, very clear.
Yep.
And there are, of course, spelling mistakes and grammatical errors and things that just don't make sense. But interestingly, and I only heard this a couple of weeks ago, somebody said to me that sophisticated fraudsters, some of them will send these out with typos in because they want to find somebody who will ignore that, because they believe that if somebody ignores that, they're more likely to ignore any other red flags as well. Huh. And that was quite interesting. What I have had before is a fraudster who clearly has been told something along these lines, because I was messaged once by somebody who straight out of the bat told me that he was dyslexic and his spelling wasn't very good. So I think he has been warned that we're on the lookout. Now, it's that thing where fraudsters are learning all the time. And you hear very, very regularly of people who they've got, let's say, a woman to go to a bank. They're going to transfer £10,000 over to wherever this person is. And they will groom the victim into talking to their bank. So they'll say to them, listen, darling, your bank is going to say this to you. This is what you need to say to them. And they're now at a point, these fraudsters, where they know. So because I don't know whether they've been told, whether somebody's sort of said, this isn't what happens, and in a moment of anger, they've accidentally taught the fraudster. But they now know what happened in our banks as well. So they're grooming people to give the right response there as well.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
well, you upset quite. There's a few stories in your book too where you got people quite upset when their bank account gets locked out.
So yes, the first of my death threats. Yeah, yeah, became an occupational hazard.
The one when I was reading your book as well, the one thing that actually got me really concerned was when you talk about deep fakes and you talk about how people can manipulate video. Because let's just assume, again, we talk about the fact that for the most part, you're not meeting in person with these people. You are corresponding them over line, and it's somewhat easy to through text to tell a story that doesn't exist. But then you get into, and you talked a little bit about, obviously with emerging AI, this issue is probably going to become more significant. Yeah. But maybe just talk a little bit about this issue of deepfakes, because let's say you're corresponding with somebody and say, well, hey, let's do a call. Let's meet in person. So you pick up your phone and you do a video call. Even then, it might not all be above board because there's ways to manipulate video, which is really scary. Because if you can do that, frankly, like, you're almost, it's, you can really take advantage with somebody if you can deep fake a video. But maybe just talk a little bit about that, because that was quite scary actually reading about that in your book.
Yeah. So the first time I took a video call was I was having a conversation on Google Chat with somebody pretending to be Liam Neeson. And we'd been kind of having this chat, and I'd been doing my usual thing of trying to waste his time. And I just pulled into the car park at my flats, my apartment, I should say. And my phone started ringing, and it said, Google Chat video call Liam Neeson. And I thought, oh, hello. So purely out of absolute fascination, I answered this call, and there he was. There's Liam Neeson chatting away, but completely silently. So after, I don't know, maybe 7-8 seconds, it goes dead. And then I get a message, and it said, I couldn't get the volume on my phone to work. I'm really sorry, but you saw it was me, didn't you, my darling? Now, what the fraudster had done is take a video of... Do you remember how in COVID, everyone was being videoed on telly in front of a bookcase?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what they'd done is taken a video of Liam Neeson where he was clearly on an interview and he was talking to the camera in front of a bookcase. And they'd stolen that. As soon as I answered the phone, they'd played that video, but silently. So that's a very, very, very simple,
absolutely
initial
anybody
way of
can
doing
do
that. Yeah. Absolutely, anybody can do that. I mean, probably not me, because I struggle to turn my laptop on sometimes, but generally anybody can do that. But now, God, now that was 2.5 years ago. And the way that things have changed is phenomenal. So we're at the point now where you don't even need expensive editing equipment, where I could, I don't know name me somebody a woman that you think is quite lovely in the media.
Oh, go with Jennifer Aniston as an example from Friends.
Okay, so let's say I'm talking to you and I'm pretending to be Jennifer Aniston, and you say to me, I'm not going to believe that I'm talking to Jennifer Aniston until you ring me. Now, it's so easy now. All I have to do is use an AI generator to put something over. So when I move my mouth, she looks like she moves her mouth. You can use her voice. So I will be talking to you with my face, with my voice, but you will see her with her voice. There's a friend of mine does quite a bit about teaching people about fraud. And she goes around schools, universities. And she got me to send her some pictures of me, and also got me to read something. So I sent her a WhatsApp voice note. And a couple of days later, she said, we've been having some fun with the students and we've done this. And she sent me this thing back, and it was my voice, but talking about something completely different.
Wow.
And I played it to my fiance, who said, what are you talking about? And I said, what do you mean? He said, I've got no idea what you want about scary. In that message. Yeah. He thought it was me. And he hears me talk a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and he would know, right? Like
Yeah, of course.
he presumably would know the, you know, the intricacies of your voice and your tells and things like that
Yeah,
and he didn't even know the difference. You know,
but it was
that
spot
is
on, and they didn't pay for that technology.
wow. 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 You mentioned Liam Neeson. So we got to talk a little bit about celebrities, Becky. What's the typical scams run by celebrities? Why do you have to be obviously people are enamored by celebrities. The difference in today's world too, you know, look at how easy, again, you mentioned the two of us. Look at how easy it was for me to connect with you. One message on LinkedIn and we can connect and we can have this conversation today. Celebrities now, and I would put you in that category. You're accessible. Like you know, whether or not you choose to respond is another thing, but you can certainly reach out to celebrities, and therefore, you know, if anything, you know, when I was a kid, you know, and if I wanted to interact with Tom Cruise, it would never happen. Now, if you want to interact with Tom Cruise, I don't know if he has a Twitter account, but you can certainly have some level of interaction. You're much closer now to celebrities now than we were when, let's say, I was a kid, and now people can play on that and run a scam based on that. So maybe just give some perspective on the risk of you know, what people need to be aware of when they get their own phone call from Liam Neeson.
um, yeah, the celebrity one, it's the thing that I'm asked about the most, because understandably people say, well, why would you send money to a celebrity? You know, somebody, Keanu Reeves, who has got, God, hundreds of millions of pounds. You're quite right in that celebrities are more accessible than ever. I mean, not many, I don't think, have their inboxes open, so I don't think you can necessarily message them, but you can tweet directly. Some celebrities tweet back. So as you say, they're much more obvious. You see much more of their lives because they post up stuff, you know, if they're at home with their dog or they're, you know, taking their hamster for a walk or whatever it is celebrities do, I don't know. So people do feel that they know them a bit more. Now, what will happen with a celebrity scam? It's not as simple as, hi, my name's Keanu Reeves, can you lend me $100? Because nobody is going to say, oh, yeah, all right then. What will happen is, and I'm just going to use Keanu Reeves as an example, who isn't on any social media, by the way, doesn't have a single social media account, not a single one. I might get a message from a Keanu who says, I'm reaching out to some of my fans. You know, have you seen any of my films? Whatever it might be, you get chatting. And he says to you that you seem like really good fun. He's going to be over in the UK in 2 months' time. His management is sorting out a load of meet and greet sessions, and he would really like it if you could be one of those. It's really annoying because his manager always insists that people have to pay for these meet and greets, but he's really hoping that you'll do it because hopefully you can hang out afterwards. So that's number one, a meet and greet session. And depending on what you choose is how much you're going to pay. So let's say 500 quid, let's just say. Keanu might say to me, you can come to a special screening, one of my films. So that's 500 quid. For £1,000, you can go to a screening and you can see him on stage afterwards. But for £2,000, you can have a dinner. You can have all of that and you can meet him afterwards and go for dinner. So that's number one. The second one, and a very plausible one, is that they are involved in a charity. Now, they'll make it very clear that they're potentially looking for a partner, but the sort of partner that they want has to have charity at their heart. They have to be a giving person. They have to understand the need of other humans. And if they're a good fraudster, they will look up what's happening in the world. So when Russia attacked Ukraine, for example, there was an influx of fake celebrity accounts saying that they were raising money for the Ukraine war effort. Because they will play on whatever is happening to tug at your heartstrings. The same with there's some mudslides in Uganda. There's just any awful thing that happens, they'll play on. And if you say, well, I already give to the Red Cross, so they'll say, oh yeah, but do it through me, and because of my status, I get tax breaks. So there's always an answer. And there are other things as well. So we have a guy over here called Martin Lewis, who's a very well-known money expert. And some time ago, there was stuff going out supposedly from him telling people to invest in XYZ platform. People were putting money into it thinking, oh my God, it's Martin Lewis, must do it. It wasn't him at all.
Wow.
So it is a thing where you think, God, that's unbelievable that somebody would send money. But I don't know. I've spoken to enough people now to know that we have this suspension of disbelief. We sometimes, humans, we use confirmation bias all the time. We sometimes see things that we want to. We hear things that we want to, and we do things that we want to be real.
So the common theme throughout all of the scammers in your book is a request for money. So presumably at some point that's coming, is that you're going to interact with these people, whether it's a quote unquote celebrity or whether it's just somebody who you've sort of fallen for online. The common theme in both of these, in all of the situations in your book, is a request for money. And is that, Becky, the ultimate warning sign? Is that, just as a starting point, if there's a request for money, like 99.9%, that's a scam. It is not,
without a doubt. Somebody who you have never met, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not, if you have not met somebody, or you haven't met anybody that they know, or do not send money. That it really is as simple as that. The problem is, it's as simple as that to say.
Yeah.
But it's not. A fraudster will sometimes spend a year grooming somebody before they ask for money. So you would say to your friends, well, he's not a fraudster. I've been with him 10 months and he's not asked me for a penny.
Yeah.
And you would believe that if you've been talking to somebody day in, day out for a year, you would say that you know them.
Absolutely.
It's much easier to spot the ones that come to my Twitter account, because I get the ones that are really rubbish. And, they speak to me for half an hour and then they say, look, I need some phone credit. Can you send me 50 quid? But fraudsters are a lot cleverer than that. And the women that I spoke to who had been a victim of romance fraud, they'd been a long time being, groomed.
Here's the one thing again that I didn't really get. Is that like in a lot of cases when they ask for money, it's not, oh, you know what, my mom's sick, we don't have paid health care, I need 20 grand. In many cases, it is these crazy stories of, this person happened, I forgot my thing, I went here, like it is this convoluted, story, which is, like we talked about oil rig workers, who knows what their life is like. Again, must be some complicated thing where they, like I said, they have no internet, they have no this, they have no that, 6 different things go wrong. And all of a sudden they need 20 grand. And I was just surprised that these stories are so outlandish. Like, it's almost like it must be true because it's so crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's stranger than fiction, so it must be true. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah. And the reason that I can empathize with that so much is, so you'll remember from the book, I talk about a relationship that I got into with somebody who was a compulsive liar. Now, the things he used to say to me, the lies he used to tell, were so ridiculous that I used to think, oh, surely that can't be made up. That's almost too ridiculous. Okay, I'll have to give him the benefit of the doubt. And it's only when you look back that you think, oh, for God's sake, what was you thinking? But yeah, there is that. And there's also, one of the reasons that they do these kind of fantastical things is because they can put this sense of urgency to it, which means that you've got less time to change your mind. So if they say to you, oh my God, this is happening, I need to get this money within 10 minutes, otherwise, I don't know, this person's going to do this to me, I don't know what to do, I've only got 10 minutes. Then emotion takes over before you even think about it. It's that thing where you haven't taken your eye off the ball. You've got that momentary vulnerability. And before you know it, you've sent over 100 quid. So all these kind of crazy things have to happen in order for stuff to happen quickly.
Yeah.
But I think it also depends on the story that they've told you so far. So it's very common for romance fraudsters to tell you that they're widowed, and they have a son or daughter. They're in, this person is fighting for his life and fighting for the freedom of his country.
Yep.
And little Dorothy is being looked after by a school because, dad is away and mummy died of cancer or was in a car crash. It's always one of those two. So there's the kind of heartstrings bit there. Now, if they've ascertained from your profile that you've got kids or that you've got grandkids or whatever, they think, they're going to like it. They're going to like the fact that I am this doting father. So they really do use all manner of things. And some of them, I've spoken to people who the story has started off fair enough. It started off in a completely average romance fraud type way. And then it's gone off on an absolutely crazy journey. Somebody's found some gold bars in the desert and then they've been kidnapped and a kidnapper has called the romance fraud
You're like a
victim
super spy or something. It's like a James Bond movie. Yeah.
Yeah. But as you say, I think there's a point where something is so weird that you think that just can't be made up.
You're right. I agree with you. Why would somebody lie about that? Like, if you're going to lie, make it simple. Why would you make it so complicated and so involved? Because the thing too is that if you make it that complicated, you would have thought that it would leave yourself open to, being challenged on any of these points. And if one point along that whole thing were to fall, presumably it's like a house of cards, the whole thing falls, but it just seems to work. That strategy just seems to be effective that they're employing. The next thing we got to just talk a little bit about, Becky, again, the numbers that you state in your book are jaw-dropping in terms of the dollars involved here. This is not an insignificant crime. We're talking major dollars, major people a significant number of people being victimized to this crime. You would have thought that law enforcement, that social media sites, that all this stuff are all over this issue. But you tell some stories in the book about that's just not the case. You have a lot of stories in your book where you had reached out to law enforcement and, maybe there's best intentions to try and deal with this, but it's just not effective. Maybe just talk a little bit about, some of the people who maybe should be doing more in order to prevent this or to shut this down. And maybe they just have other things that are higher priority, like maybe people, getting killed and murdered and raped and all this other sort of stuff. Maybe that's where they're spending their time on. But again, when you look at the numbers of fraud, this is right up there on the list. So maybe just give some perspective a little bit of perspective on that, on how effective we are at actually prosecuting the people who are committing these crimes.
Yeah. So I can only really talk from a UK perspective. Having said that, I have spoken to people in North America. I've spoken to a couple of police officers over there who have basically said, they're fighting a losing battle just as we are over this side of the pond.
Yeah.
But the terrifying statistic that I've said in the book and that I quote is that the UK Home Office found out that fraud now is responsible for 40% of crime in the UK. And that is all fraud, not just romance fraud. That is all types of fraud, investment, credit card, shopping scams, whatever. But police resource that is attributed to combating fraud is 1%.
Wow.
Now that, when you sit back and you think about it, and I've been thinking about this for ages, it's appalling. I've spoken to a lot of people in the police, both policemen and civilians who work in the force. And every single one has been completely dedicated. So it's not the fault of the personnel within the police, it's the system.
Yeah.
The police system is flawed.
Yeah.
It's hugely understaffed, hugely under budgeted. And there are things that if you consider that a lot, the majority of romance fraud perpetrators are out of UK jurisdiction, what are our police force going to spend their time doing? They're not going to spend time trying to get £1,000 back for somebody when it means they have to, liaise with police over in another country. It's just, I hate this phrase, but it's not worth their time.
Yep.
So it's very, very difficult. And it also puts the people within the police force in a very difficult situation as well, because they're so criticised for it.
Yeah.
It's a really, really hard one. And when I've spoken to officers over in North America as well, they've said they get people coming in saying, so-and-so has defrauded me. But when they're in a different state, that then causes a problem because of the way that the system is over in North America. So,
absolutely. And
then if you've got more than 2 states involved, well, God, everyone just gives up then because it's such a nightmare.
You're right.
Now, whenever if I speak at a webinar or a conference or something, people always say, so what's the answer? I think, oh God, I have no idea. I know that it is a problem which is getting worse by the year, by the month, by the bloody week. And I don't know the answer because I am just a normal person. But worryingly, nor does anyone else. Nor do the experts, nor do the academics, nor do the lawmakers. Nobody knows what to do.
The beauty of it is, the good side of this is that if you're a victim of a violent crime, there's probably not much you could have done about it. If you look in hindsight, you might have just been bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. You can be as educated as you go and take karate lessons or do whatever you want, but even that might have not been enough. But the benefit of really what you're doing with your book and educating people is that if people are educated on the topic and there's an awareness out there on this particular topic, that might get you 80-90% of the way there. You know what I mean? And if you can hopefully your book sells millions and millions of copies and people pick up this book and read it all over the world, because if you read it cover to cover, hopefully that adds in a certain layer of protection where if you can recognize those warning signs, maybe you won't be the victim of a crime. You know what I mean? In the same way, because it's a different crime than, say, a violent crime. You know what I mean? Where or something else. So if you can educate people and educate as many people as you possibly can, that's probably a good, that's a really good thing. You know what I mean? And maybe that shuts some of it down. You know what I mean?
And I've had some really incredibly kind messages from people who've said either I read your book and I've stopped speaking to somebody, or I even had a message this morning saying that I read parts of your book to my mum, who has now agreed to stop sending somebody money that she's been talking to online. And hearing that is absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
And the thing that I like the most is when somebody tells me that having read the book, they're no longer going to refer to people as falling for fraud, because that's my least. I hate that expression. I think it's awful.
This is a crime. This is a criminal offense. Saying
that somebody falls for something. We don't fall for a murder. Oh God, I fell for a burglary last night. It's derogatory. It's
Absolutely.
Saying that you just walked into it. So when I've had people say, I am never using that expression again, I think, yes, job done.
Here's another possible answer is that, we talk about AI and the power of AI. Could the social media companies do more to leverage AI to say all those warning signs you point out in the book, they spot that, poof, and this gets shut down? Or is that, obviously there's a balance between privacy and how much people can monitor communications and things like that. But do you think there's more that the social media companies could do to kind of shut this down?
Absolutely loads more they could do. I know that dating sites have done quite a bit recently in terms of if they come across a profile that they work out has liked like 100 people an hour kind of thing, that's a red flag to them, and that's gone. And they've made sort of reporting a lot easier and that kind of thing. In terms of, and I'm just going to use Twitter and Instagram as an example because I'm familiar with them. all you have to do, even if you get somebody shut down, all they have to do is set up another profile. They just need another email address.
Yeah.
And you can have a million email addresses. Now, I don't know whether there's something that somebody very clever can work out where you can't, if you get blocked from one IP address, you can't set up another one from that same IP address. I don't even know whether that's possible. But if it is, maybe that's something that is being looked at. I don't know. But there is more that can be done, because social media is, all it's doing is growing.
Yeah.
And they're getting blamed for not doing stuff. So why aren't they? Look at, oh God, Elon Musk, right? So he took away the blue tick from Twitter. That was a fraudster's dream.
Yeah.
Because suddenly anybody can pretend to be a celebrity.
Yeah.
Because they either buy a blue tick or they say, no, I'm refusing to buy one. You know, things like that are a huge backward step. And I'm just going to have a very quick rant now. So, Facebook, the kids in Nigeria who commit these romance frauds call themselves Yahoo boys. If you go into Facebook and you type in Yahoo boys into the search bar, you can join groups of Yahoo boys where they teach each other to scam and they offer lessons to scam.
Yeah.
Now, I got to get, there's an absolutely huge bunch of us decided to get all of these and we reported them to Facebook. 9 months later, they're still up.
Wow.
So that's an easy win. It's got the name of something that is illegal.
Yeah.
Surely, how can that not be being picked up?
Yeah, there's low-hanging fruit. Absolutely.
Of course, yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm still baffled by that.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. So we got to talk a little bit, Becky, about the guys, because in your book you don't get into the guys, and I'm going to share a brief story. One of the folks that we've had on the program a while ago was a guy by the name of Chris. Now, Chris was ex of the RCMP and ex of the USDEA. Needless to say, he knew his way around romance frauds and various frauds and things like that. And I was sitting with Chris at one point. And this concept of a honey trap came up. I didn't know what a honey trap was. And so I asked Chris, I said, do I need to know what a honey trap is? And he sat back in his chair and he said, Scotty, he goes, when you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror, do you see George Clooney? And I said, Chris, no, I do not see George Clooney. He said, do you see Matt Damon? I said, no, 0 for 2, Chris. I do not see Matt Damon looking back at me. He says, Brad Pitt. I said, Chris, I get it. I get the point you're trying to make. I was not born with movie star good looks. And he says, Scott, he goes, that is a massive understatement. So I said, Chris, let's just get to the point here. I said, do I need to know what a honey trap is? And he says, Scott, he goes, you absolutely need to know what a honey trap is. You are a prime candidate. So maybe, Becky, if you can give some perspective on what a honey trap is, and maybe just talk a little bit about, you mentioned guys being victimized to romance fraud, but maybe just talk a little bit about why the focus in your book was on the ladies and not the not the guys. But maybe just give a perspective on a honey trap and why we need to be aware of that.
So a honey trap, very simply put, is someone's image being used, very, very attractive, to lure somebody in for some kind of crime. I think that's probably the simplest way I can. And really, all romance fraud, really, they're all honey traps, because they're using these, fabulous, attractive people with great jobs and all the rest of it to attract us mere mortals. But it's used more often when it comes to men being caught out, because the stereotypical honey trap would be, this sort of tall, leggy, beautiful woman, and she's been sort of sent to pretend to fall in love with somebody so that he will reveal all his secrets.
Yep.
And as I said before, romance fraud is 50-50 men and women. But the way that they are wooed is very different. So women are, and this is in the main, not all,
Yep.
Women are wooed by the prospect of love and romance, and with men it's some form of sexual gratification. So you think, oh god, what a stereotype, but actually it is
It is
actually
what it
true.
is. Yep.
And this is where the honey trap thing comes in. So it will often be images of girls from Thailand. So this kind of stereotype of a beautiful Thai lady, or there will be the Russian model, or wherever the most gorgeous women you can imagine. That's basically what you're looking at here, and they will be speaking to average Joe, and this guy will be thinking, "Oh my god, how have I managed this?" And his ego goes through the roof because she's like, "Oh, I don't like men who look like George Clooney.
Exactly.
I like men who are 15 stone overweight, with no hair and ears that stick out 3 foot.
He's
That's
a
my
nice
type."
guy. He's a nice guy.
So, that's where it comes in. Now, interestingly, with the honey traps that are used in romance fraud with these, very sort of beautiful looking women, it's often men that are behind the profiles.
Yeah.
So when these guys are talking to these beautiful women, it's often a guy sitting on the other side of it. And this man is having text sex with a big strapping bloke sitting, in a call center somewhere. So it's a really, really interesting one. I'd love to have looked into it more. I did choose women because it is, like with a lot of things, it's easier to get women to talk about, the fact that they've been the victim of something than men, because there is that ego thing, unfortunately. Yep. So it was, I did it that way. And also because having had experience of kind of being in a coercively controlling relationship, I was able to empathize more. But I'd like to look into the male side of it more, the sextortion side, because of course what happens is that this man pretending to be a beautiful lady from Thailand will say, right, I'm going to send you a saucy video, but as long as you promise to send me one back. So the man says, oh yeah, okay, I can understand why everybody would want to see that. So they send this video over, and before you know it, you've got a man contacting them saying, listen, that was me. I've hacked into your Facebook account. I've got your wife's number. I know where you work. I've got your kids' email addresses. And unless you send me however much money, I'm going to send your video on. And it's incredibly effective because people will do anything to protect themselves and to not lose their family, friends, job, whatever it might be. It's very effective.
Absolutely. And do you find, you mentioned that the women that you deal with are very open in talking to you about this, and that made it easier to obviously to write the book, because your book is filled with great stories. Do you find the men are just not as open? Like when you feel like people are reaching out to you on Twitter and saying, you know what, they got me type of thing, I'd love to tell you my story or whatever. Do you find many men reaching out, or is it pretty much predominantly women who are sharing the stories with you? Because the other thing too is you talk numbers. You hate to see what the unreported numbers are, because you're just going by what's reported. The unreported numbers, I don't know, double, triple, 10x what in your book?
I don't even think that 10% of it is reported.
Yeah.
I don't even think 5% of it is reported. In terms of when I realised that I was going to start writing the book, I did a shout out on Twitter and I said, I'm looking to speak to people.
Yep.
And I did have men contact me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And this is really interesting. I found that when I spoke to them, they were more upset. So, and I haven't worked out in my head why this is, but the women that I spoke to, they got very, very upset. When I went to visit them in their homes, for example, and we sat and had a cup of tea, British, we would sit and have a cup of tea, and they would get upset then. But until that point, they were quite matter of fact about how they were explaining these things. This happened and this happened, and sort of quite clear about it. The men that I spoke to were very, very emotional very quickly. And I think it's because, and I'm sort of going through this in my head now, I think it's because there's something more traumatic about the blackmail. Like, so if they think that they're going to lose their wife and their kids, and it's not just because that they've lied to them about money, it's because they're going to have been caught out to have sent videos and to effectively have been cheating, if that's where you have your boundaries. I think there was this big sort of flow out of emotion because they realised how close they had become. Now, I think what the women go through is absolutely revolting, obviously. But I think because there's less of a sextortion element to it, there's less of a blackmail, there's perhaps not so much fear. There's pain, but there isn't so much fear. And I mean, I feel like I'm sort of making that up as it goes along. It makes sense in my head, so I'm just saying it out loud.
No, that makes sense.
But it was very, very interesting, and it's not what I expected. I almost expected it to be the other way round.
Because the women in your book were not blackmailed. That wasn't that they were victimized because they were too kind, and they were trying to. It is a different crime in both of those. I think you're right. I think the women at that, like, they weren't. I don't think they were worried about losing their significant other or anything like that. Maybe they were a little bit concerned about their kids finding out. I think that might have been, certainly, embarrassed.
Certainly.
But it wasn't. I can't imagine that where the kids would never talk to them ever again. I don't think that would be the outcome. I think the kids would want to help. I would think but in the other case where it's blackmail, it's a different fact pattern. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there was one guy I spoke to, and I remember thinking how this was. You just never get over this. He was married, he had kids, and he was a teacher. And when it came out that he'd sent this explicit video to somebody who he thought was a woman, and the man said, we've got this, and the images and the video that this guy had sent, the man was saying that the person who was on the other end was a minor. So, of course, he's then got this fear that he's going to be picked up by the police for sending images to a minor.
Yeah,
and as a teacher, not only is that the loss of his career, but that's a jail sentence.
That's a problem.
As a sex offender.
Yeah.
So I think there is perhaps an element of it being more quick and extreme with men. I mean, there was one lady in my book who was the victim of sextortion, and she was an older lady. She hadn't been speaking to the fraudster for very long. She'd sent him, maybe about £400. So it was a lot of money to her. It's a lot of money to me, but it wasn't, she wasn't going to go bankrupt because of it. But she sent him this money, and then she discovered, by looking her own kind of bit of detective work, she looked in the background of a photo and long story short, discovered he wasn't who he said he was. So she sent him a message saying, "I know you're not who you say you are." He then said to her, "Yeah, all right, yeah, fine, you got me." Now, she'd sent him £400 by this point. She thought that's the end of it. However, he said to her, "Right, I'm not going to get any more money from you as a fraudster. However, what I will tell you is, from that time we were together, I've got images of you, intimate images." So she lost £400 as a victim of romance fraud. As a victim of sextortion, she went off to lose an additional £14,000.
Yeah.
Because she would do anything to not have her children see that, and her grandchildren. Yeah. And this lady was in her, I think, late 60s. So that was awful. And even when she had said to him, "I don't have another penny to give you," he then started sending her packages for her to send on. So she wasn't sending any money, but he was then using her as a mule.
Yeah.
So he's got his hands on her.
So last topic, Becky, is new projects. You had mentioned earlier that you really enjoyed writing the book. Again, would highly encourage everybody to take a read of it. You're seriously thinking about your next book. You talked about, I read a little bit about what you write online about this issue of, people sending pictures. There's there's this classic scene from Succession where one of the guys sends a picture that was meant for a lady. He sent it inadvertently to his father. And it didn't really play out very well, as one could imagine. And so if they're profiling this in Succession, I would guess this is an issue. But maybe just give us some perspective on what to look forward to in the future from Becky Holmes. What's the next topic?
So I would very much like to write about cyber flashing. And I've done my proposal. It's with my agent at the moment. So whether anyone will pick it up or not, I don't know. But there is a book in there. It is a really interesting subject. And again, like with the romance fraud, it's not automatically what it seems. When you look at the psychology behind it, why people do it, how it affects people that receive it. But the interesting thing with this topic is the changes that it's having in how young people view each other, view sex as a whole, view kind of assaults. It's a really, really interesting subject. And I've become aware of it because when you have a large social media following, you also tend, that the more followers you have, the more unsolicited images you are sent. And for the last, 18 months, I've been having this online dalliance with this guy called Greg, who constantly sends me pictures. And I very, very much enjoy changing the subject to such an extent that he gets really, really cross with me and can't work out why I'm not engaging with this. And then he goes off in a mood for a month and doesn't speak to me. And then he comes back and tries again. So the last one was he sent me something and I started talking about how small his hands were and, directing him to medical encyclopedias to have a look and see if he could get some help and that kind of stuff. And he gets really, really angry. And I persuaded him once that he had a spot on his stomach which looked like it was going to be a life-threatening emergency. And he ended up even going to the doctor about it and sending me a picture of his shaved stomach back and said, "Look what you've made me do." So it's sort of... I really enjoy my little chats with Greg. But it's been an interesting thing with that as well, because I've had so many people, again, message me and say, I didn't realise this was quite as prolific as it is.
Agreed. I totally agree with that. I would never have thought, Becky, that this was a quote-unquote thing.
It is. I mean, the research that I've been doing, it's shown me... I mean, for example, I don't know anybody. I don't know of any female in my life that hasn't had one of these pictures if they're on social media. So I don't think my mum's had one, unless someone's posted one through the post. But it is rife. And some of them are men who think that it's playful. I've had people send pictures to me where they've put a little bow tie on them and stuff. And I think, what's that for? But, so there's that end of the spectrum. But then there's also the guys who send horrible, aggressive photos with a rape threat attached.
Wow.
So there is this scale of revolting people out there. And it's an interesting subject.
What's their end game? What's their end game, Becky? What are they trying to get out of it? Like in the case of romance fraud, it is money. That's the ultimate end game. What's the end game with sending these pictures?
So it's a little bit more complicated because obviously you're dealing with kind of human sexuality and feelings of power and all those sorts of things. But generally what people are saying, now bearing in mind that I haven't finished research, but there seems to be younger people. So, they're starting off doing this at 11 or 12 in schools. And they're kind of like they hope that there's a transactional nature. So they're thinking, right, if I send this to a girl, I might get photos of her back.
I see.
So you could say in terms of the unsolicited images scale, that's kind of more of the innocent side because they don't really understand or whatever. Now, that's very damaging in a lot of ways because it's very damaging in terms of what boys are learning is acceptable and what girls are learning is acceptable that they should put up with.
Yeah.
And you only hope that through education and their own experiences, they grow out of that. and it stays kind of a naivety and a mistake that they realise they've made, and they move on to be better, in inverted commas. At the other end of the scale, you've got the people who do it because they want to cause distress. So, and this could be targeted. So it could be, let's say that you interviewed somebody for a job and you didn't give it to them. So they want to distress you. They want to show you that they're powerful.
Wow.
You know, it is really, really interesting. And my two of my best friends are men, straight men. And these two they are just, every time I see them, they say, well, what have you found out today? Because I think they can't understand what would possess a man, a decent, honest man who respects women, to do something like that.
Yeah.
If you're in a relationship and you ask for something or whatever, fair enough, whatever you like. But don't just airdrop a picture to a girl on a bus or to a classmate. Or
no, look, you know, I mentioned Succession. That is a very, very popular TV series. I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but it is super popular here in North America. And I would be very interesting to sit with the producers and ask them why they thought to put in that particular scene in the show, because it's just interesting that they put that in there, because it must be a thing. And it's just weird that it was that, because you're looking at that and saying, like, why would somebody do that? Especially somebody like that. The person that does it in the show, again, you know, obviously he's the son of a very rich individual and got all the money in the world. But you ask yourself, why would he think to do that?
I can answer that question for you. Because Jesse Armstrong, the writer of Succession, has said that the reason that he put it in is because Roman Roy, who is the character that sends it, is this, he's kind of full of this angst and this sort of strange, you know, so it's talked about through even the first series that he doesn't particularly have sex with his partners. There's this strange thing going on. And then he develops this very strange relationship with this kind of humiliation. And it's all sort of bundled up in terms of it's something that happens all the time now. But it was the perfect character to show this because he's such a confusing, angry, uncertain character.
That's true. And so if, and I agree with all of that. And if you were to tell me before, they're going to put in this scene and they're going to have one person to do it, you would probably pick Roman as the person who's going to do it.
Yeah.
But I still would have thought that he wouldn't even do that. You know what I mean? Like but
it's also, it's an entitlement. So he is a very entitled character. So it's this kind of, I can do what I want.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Well, Becky, we could talk forever here. Thank you very much for joining. I hope people have listened, have learned, and become educated, because again, as we talked about, what are the tools that you can use to fight this? Education is critical. And if you're properly educated on this topic, I think that will help you significantly. And again, the what you've done to help people with that through the book and everything else you do through public speaking and everything is a huge it's a huge help. And again, be nothing better than this book to go out and sell millions and millions of copies around the world. And I can't even think of how many romance frauds are stopped because people took the time to read your book and shut it down early before any real money got wired to wherever it wasn't supposed to go. So, Becky, thank you very much. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you. It's been really, really good fun as well.